Rising sea levels, melting glaciers, and more heat waves could be the new normal. This is according to a United Nations panel out with a dire warning about greenhouse gas emissions. CCTV's Jim Spellman has the details from our Washington, D.C. newsroom. Jim.
Susan, what's really striking about this report is how long-term the effects of climate change will be if the world's leaders don't act fast. The latest assessment by the United Nations that global climate change is likely to create severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts for people and ecosystems.
This report offers three key messages. One, human influence on the climate system is clear and clearly growing. We must act. Second, we must act quickly and decisively if we want to avoid increasingly destructive outcomes. Three, we have the means to limit climate change and build a better future.
Those destructive outcomes could include widespread flooding, food shortages, extinctions of plants and animals, and refugee crises that would hit the world's poorest, most vulnerable communities the hardest. Members of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change admit changing course and heading off the most severe effects won't be easy.
What we have provided by way of options is a menu that includes energy efficiency and including changes in demand in the sectors where energy is consumed on a large scale. We've talked about renewable energy. We've talked about carbon capture and storage.
Carbon capture includes trapping emissions from power plants and storing them, usually underground, instead of sending them into the atmosphere. Without carbon capture, the report says all burning of fossil fuel would have to end to stop the worst effects of climate change.
Power generation from fossil fuels would need to be phased out by the end of this century.
The UN panel says the science is clear and the solutions are known, but that science will only go so far towards fixing the problem.
The scientific community has now spoken, but we are passing on the baton to politicians, to the decision-making community.
But political will has long lagged behind the science around climate change. To make the changes necessary to head off the worst impacts of climate change would likely mean major commitments of money and could potentially slow economic growth in the short term. But this UN panel says if political leaders around the world don't make those hard choices soon, the world will pay the price for generations to come, Susan.
Jim, so what's next now that the UN has published these findings?
Well, this report will be used as a basis for discussion late next year when world leaders will gather in Paris to try to forge a far-reaching climate change treaty. Kind of a mixed message, I have to say, the urgency in this report, and then they're not even meeting for after a year to try to work on solutions based on it. But that's kind of what you get when you have such large bodies as these world governments, Susan.
Jim Spellman, thank you. Reporting live from our newsroom, as always.